Hello and welcome back to another video tutorial here at GeekatPlay Studios. My name is Gary Miller. Had a request over in one of the forums, the Photoshop forum, on how to create realistic planets and how to incorporate that planet into a view render. Well, I'm going to do two tutorials. The first one on how to create a realistic looking planet, and the second one on essentially doing some matte painting and blending the planet into a view background render. Well, in creating a planet, I decided to make a difficult to create planet, one like planet Earth. A planet like Jupiter is fairly easy to make because that's just a swirly marble type pattern, or a planet like Venus that's just a couple colors blended together. But to create a planet Earth is far more involving because it requires a lot of layers, and you've got to create a water layer, you've got to create land, you've got to create some texture and some bump, you have to add some cloud layers, and I figured I would do the hardest, do an example of how to create the hardest planet, because then you can tailor it down to your own needs if you want to create a simpler one. So this is what I came up with in Photoshop, and that's what we're going to set out to duplicate today. So let's start with a new file, new, and I'm going to make it 1000 by 1000, 300 dpi. I'm going to set my foreground and background colors to default, Alt-Delete to fill that in with black. I'm going to create a new layer above that. Come up here and select my Elliptical Marquee tool. I'm going to hold down Shift, so I will create a perfect circle, and I'll just place that in the middle somewhat of my image. I'm going to come up here, actually come over here. I want to change my colors because we're going to create our water layer first, and I want to create a dark blue color. I'm going to click on my other color and I'll create a light blue color, and over in filter, come down to render and hit clouds, and that will be my ocean. Now what I want to do is I want to give this the appearance of a sphere rather than just a round dot. So with this circular object selected as a selection, I'm going to come up here to filter, distort, and spherize. 100% mode is normal, and that gives it a sphere look. I'm going to hit the filter once again to see if I like those results better. And no, I think I'll stick with the first one. I'm going to Control D to deselect that. I'm going to Control L to bring up my levels. And I'm just going to bring up the darkness a little bit more, increase the light area, maybe not the light. There we are. Okay, I like that effect. I'm going to Control A to select that entire layer, and now I'm going to use my move tool, and I will center this in the middle of my scene. Control D to deselect, create a new layer above that. Now what I want to do is reset my colors back to black and white, and I want to create a landmass on top of my water layer, and so that my entire image is not filled in with land, I'm going to Control click on my water layer. Now on this layer, when I fill it in using a cloud filter, it will only fill in this area, this selected area, with my clouds. So come down here to render in clouds. And I don't like that. I'm going to come back to render, and I'm going to try different clouds. And I'm just going to hit Control F, which will run that filter again. And let me bring up my levels, Control L. I'm going to bring up my shadow or darkness slider until I see something that looks like continents, islands, land masses. and I'm not real happy with that, so I'll run filter, Control F, run the filter again, and I like that. Let's bring up my levels, Control L, and this might work. I'm going to bring it right up to there. There we are. Control D to deselect that. I'm going to come over to my magic wand tool. I'm going to have the tolerance set to 20, and I want to have add to selection enabled so I can click and just continue adding to my selection here. And I want to click on these black areas because I want to delete that, and when we delete it, it will allow the water layer underneath to come through. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to come up here to select, modify, and feather. I want to feather the radius of this selection by 3 pixels, so I'll click OK, and now I'll hit delete, and that gets rid of those dark areas. Now what I need to do is I need to make this look like land. It looks kind of, well, like clouds right now. So I'm going to come into Adobe Bridge, and I'm going to choose a metal texture. Let me come down here to my metals, and I'll choose this one. Come to a split screen, bring it, drag it on in, and now I'm just going to position this in my layer. Okay, what I want to do is create a selection by control clicking on the thumbnail of this land layer, and I want to come up here to select inverse. Now on my metal layer, I'm going to hit delete. Control D to deselect, and now I have my islands with the metal layer on it. Well, I don't need this layer anymore. I can delete that. Now I want to duplicate that layer. I'll hide the bottom one. On this layer, it looks like metal. It doesn't really look like landmass. So what I want to do is use this layer only for its color value. So I'm going to click on here and lock the transparent pixels. I'm going to control click on there to create a selection. I'm going to come up here to filter, blur, and Gaussian blur, and I want to apply a good strong blur to this so it doesn't look like metal anymore, but rather smudged brown areas that could potentially be land masses. Okay, click OK, Control D to deselect. I like that. Now on this bottom, this duplicate copy, I'm going to come up here to Image, Adjustments, and I want to desaturate that. I'm going to come back up here, Filter, Stylize, and Emboss, and I'm going to use a height of 3 and an amount of, about 61. Drag that layer on top and use my blending mode to overlay, and now I have something that looks a little bit better. Well, I'm going to create a layer in between them. Come over here to my paintbrush tool, select kind of a green color that could be vegetation on Earth, and make sure my brush is set to a soft brush. I'm going to control click on the thumbnail, so now I have this area masked off, so now I can only draw in this area, and I'm going to set the mode of the brush to, let's try multiply. I'll bring the opacity down to about 45–50%, and I'll just start painting in some green areas. And I'll change the color of my brush again, add a little variation in here. so that when it's all done, it'll look a little bit more realistic. And let's change the color again. Just play around. It's pretty straightforward. Just brush around, brush your color on, create some vegetation looking areas. And I think I will create some deserty areas, something a little drier looking. Okay, that looks pretty good. Control D to deselect. Actually, I'm not going to deselect that. I'm just going to add a Gaussian blur to this so it blends a little more smoothly onto my terrain. I guess that will work. Now I will Control D to deselect. I'm just going to lump all three of these together and merge them into one layer. Now what I want to do is add a little depth to this. So I'm going to double click on that layer, come up here to Bevel and Emboss, and I want to be on Chisel Hard. And let's see, Outer Bevel now. Let's come down here to, I guess it'll be Outer Bevel. We'll have to bring the size down a little bit. That doesn't look very realistic. Let's try Smooth. Smooth might look a little bit, Smooth looks a little bit better. Okay, now something I have learned is that while this might look okay now, it won't look good later. So I'm going to bring the opacity of these layers down quite substantially. And let me zoom in, and I'll come back here and click on Contour, and let's play with some of the contours until we find something that we like. Now that's nice and crisp. I like that. Come back to Bevel and Emboss, and bring the opacity of that down. Definitely bring down the highlight opacity, and that looks good. And click OK and exit out of that. Now this is the before and the after, and I think that looks a little bit better. I'm going to create a layer in between here, and I'm going to Control click, create a mask or a selection out of the upper layer, but I'm still on this other one down at the bottom. I want my color to be white. Now with this selection, I want to come up here to Select, Modify. I want to expand that by 5 pixels. Now I'm going to Alt Delete and fill that area in with white. Control D to deselect. Now what that did is it created almost like a shoreline around my land masses, which is exactly what I want. But it also created a shoreline around the outside of my planet, which I don't want. So I'm going to Control click on my planet, which will create a selection around that. I'm going to invert that selection, and on that shoreline that I created, I'm going to hit delete, and now everything is contained inside here on my planet. And what I want to do now is add a little Gaussian blur to my shoreline, and you'll see it starts looking a lot more realistic. And now let's bring our blending modes down. Let's lighten, probably overlay or soft light. Actually, I kind of like soft light. This is without the shoreline. This is with the shoreline. It's a lot more realistic. And looking at the Bevel and Emboss now, with our shoreline, I think we're going to have to bring some of this down a little bit. It looks to be a little too deep. I think that looks a little better. All right, now I'm going to create a new layer above all of that because now we're going to create some clouds. Before I create those clouds, though, I think I will merge together the land and the shoreline. So with both of those selected, I'm going to come down here to merge layer and double click on my water layer, and still with my land layer selected, I'm going to come up here to filter, distort, and spherize 100%, and that will give me a better looking, except let me undo that merge layer, except what it does is I lose the blending mode of soft light, so I'll have to do each one separately. Spherize that, come down here, spherize that. That looks a lot better. Okay, now I'll merge them together. It's still not going to allow me to do that. So I'll just keep them as separate layers. That's fine. I'll just call this foam so that I remember, because we still have a lot more layers to add. So now we're on our cloud layer. I still want this selection that I got from my land mass, and set my default colors, filter, render clouds, filter, render different clouds, and I'm just going to hit Control F until I see a formation of clouds that I like. I like that. Let me bring up my levels. Oop, wrong one. Let me bring up my darkness slider on my levels. No, I don't like that. Control F, Control L to bring up my levels. I like that. Okay, click OK. Control D to deselect, bring up my magic wand tool. Select these black areas because we will delete them. And select modify feather 3 pixels. Hit delete, Control D to deselect. Now for my clouds, I'm going to set that to screen. Let me disable these so I can get a better visual of what I've got here. Let me call this clouds. What I want to do is add a little motion to these clouds. So again, clicking on my water layer, I'll come up here to filter and distort and twirl. And I'm going to add a twirl of about 200 and get an idea on what it looks like and see if we need to go from there. And I like that. Control D to deselect, Control T to bring up my free transform tool. I'm going to come down here to right click, come down to warp, and I'm just going to distort this so that it's not in the center of my planet. I don't think that looks very real. And we'll just push it up in the top corner like that. And even though it's outside of the borders of my planet, that's okay, because I'll just Control click on my planet, inverse that selection, hit delete, Control D to deselect, and it trims off the excess. Grab my eraser tool and just get rid of a lot of this excess here, and especially the hard lines from using the warp tool. Okay, I'm going to create another layer above that. Control click on my water layer with my default colors. Come up here to filter, render clouds, and I'll probably want different clouds again. So render difference clouds, and Control F to cycle through and just continue running this filter until I see something that I like. I like that. Let me see. Bring up my levels. Control L. That will work. I'm going to click OK. Control D to deselect. I'm going to select these black areas again. And I think this will work. I'm going to feather that selection again. Modify feather, 3 pixels, OK, delete, Control D to deselect. I'm going to Control click on my water layer and run my spherize filter 100%. Click OK, Control D to deselect, change that blending mode to screen. Now I want this layer under the swirling cloud layer, and on my second layer of clouds I want to erase some of the clouds that overlap and blend in with that swirling cloud layer, because I think that's just a few too many clouds. And I'm going to bring the opacity of this brush down and just make this layer not quite so dark. Actually, I'm going to undo that. Bring back my, because now that I've enabled the land, it doesn't look so bad now. Okay, now we're going to add a great deal of realism to this. I'm going to hide my terrain, and with my top layer selected, I'm going to zoom in a little bit and come down here to filter and render and lighting effects, and I'm just going to use this default setup here, expand it maybe just a little bit, but I'm going to come down here to the texture channel and choose the red. White is high, I want that checked, 50% in between flat and mountainous, and I'm going to click OK, and look at the texture that it has given to these clouds. It looks far more realistic. And with my second cloud layer selected, I'm going to run that filter again, and it adds a nice quilted clouded look to this. Re-enable the view of my land. Okay. I like that. I'm going to take all these layers here, select them, drag them over my create new layer icon, which will essentially copy them. I'm going to right click and pull those together. I'm going to select my other ones and I'm going to drag them over, select create new group, and I'm just going to disable the view of them. I'm just saving those as a backup in case I do something that I don't like. I'm going to double click on my planet here, and we're going to start off with inner shadow. I'm going to change this to normal, bring the opacity 100%, bring the size up to, I'll give it 400, and I'm going to change the direction of the light down here, and now I'm just bring the distance, actually I want the distance up to about 400, not the size. And look at the realism this starts bringing into the image. Now you can adjust the size to make the shadow fall off a little bit sharper. I think it looks a little bit better with it softer. Maybe I'll change the distance to 350, and that looks pretty good. Let's come back and apply some more layer effects to this. Let's come over here to outer glow. I'm going to click on my color swatch, and I'm going to sample some of the blue in the scene here. Click OK. I'm going to bring the size out a little bit and then bring down the opacity of it. Now an effect that really starts adding a lot of realism is inner glow. I'm going to click on that color swatch, sample the blue from the water, make it a light blue color, and then just start bringing in the size, and look what that starts doing to it. It starts adding atmosphere to this. Maybe bring the opacity down a little bit, play with the adjustments till you get something that you like. Adjust the choke if you want. I think I'll leave it as all the way down to 0. Click OK, and there is a very realistic looking planet Earth for your view renders. Now, something I've noticed is when I shrink this down, I start losing the proportion of my layer effects. So I'll just have to come back in here and play with the numbers and bring them down again, readjust it. And the inner glow, I'm going to have to do the same. So this is creating a very detailed, very intricate, and very realistic planet, Earth-like planet in Photoshop that in our second tutorial we're going to bring into view and composite the two together. So that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching here at GeekatPlay Studios. My name is Gary Miller. Have a good day.